Lesson 3, the Sankhya System. In the great system of Hindu philosophy known as the Sankhya System, we have one of the oldest forms of philosophical conceptions known in that land of old systems of thought. While it is customary to ascribe to Kapila, who lived about 700 BC, the honor of having originated this great system of thought, still Sanskrit scholars have discovered the fundamental portions of Kapila's teachings in the older writings of the race, and the probability is that the teaching itself is many centuries older than Kapila, and that he merely arranged the fragments of older systems into a clearly defined school of philosophy, discarding the outside accumulations that had gathered around the older teachings, and emphasizing certain fundamental principles that had been overlooked. At any rate, traces of the teachings now known as the Sankhya system may be found as far back as 2000 BC, and the fundamental conceptions probably run back still further. The term Sankhya means correct enumeration or perfect classification. The basic proposition of the Sankhya system is that there exists in the universe two active principles, the interaction of which produces the activities of the universe, including those of life, the play and interplay of the two manifesting in countless forms, combinations and infinite variety. These two principles are known as 1. Prakriti, or the primordial substance or energy, from which all material forms and energies evolve, and 2. Purusha, or the spirit principle, which ensouls or seeks embodiment in Prakriti, and thus gives rise to all the various forms of differentiation, from atoms to man, and which is not conceived of by the Sankhyas as forming one universal soul, as do the yoga scholars, but which is held to be composed of countless spirit atoms, monads, or individual spirits, which units as a whole compose a unity of units, which may be considered in the light of a principle. There are many points of difference between the various conceptions of the real nature of Purusha and Prakriti, particularly on the part of Western writers on the subject, some of which are totally at variance with the beliefs and conceptions of the advanced Hindu adherents of this philosophy. We shall consider each of the three leading conceptions in turn, pointing out the errors where they exist. The first conception of the nature of Purusha and Prakriti, and the one which is favored by the majority of Western writers on the subject, is that which holds that Kapila's theories are atheistic and practically materialistic, inasmuch as he ignores the existence of a supreme power, Brahman, or that, and postulates a dual eternal thing, one half of the duad being matter. This view interprets the teachings of Kapila to mean that there are two eternal things, the first of which is matter, and the second of which is spirit, divided into countless atoms, both Purusha and Prakriti being held as eternal, infinite and immortal, and both of which are self-existent and sustaining, requiring no supreme power as a basis or background. This conception is decidedly in error, and the spirit of the philosophy has been lost to those who so hold. The error regarding the discarding of the belief in that or Brahman, however, is easily explained. In the first place, there is nothing in the teachings of Kapila or of his early followers, in which the existence of that is denied or condemned. There is simply a silence regarding it, just as is the case in Buddhism, and the cause is the same in both cases. Both Kapila and Buddha accepted the centuries-old doctrine of that, which no Hindu philosophy had questioned, and both then proceeded to account for the phenomenal universe. Had Kapila attempted to discard the universal conception of that, he would have certainly attacked the doctrine, and have set up arguments against it, accompanied by illustrations, parables, and analogous proofs, with which the Hindu philosophers always have been so well supplied and which they have used so freely. But Kapila does not mention the matter, but calmly proceeds to elaborate his system, explaining the phenomena of the universe. To those who have penetrated beneath the surface of the Sankhya system, and who are familiar with the Hindu methods of thought and teachings, it readily will be seen that there is nothing atheistic or materialistic in the conceptions of the Sankhya system. Among the Hindus, the charge of atheism made against the Sankhyas comes principally from the followers of Patanjali, the yogi, who hold to the existence of a supreme Purusha or universal oversoul, and who, consequently, resent the Sankhyas' failure to recognize their favorite conceptions. And the charge of materialism comes from the Vedantists, who deny the existence of matter, considering it as maya or delusion. In fact, Prakriti is rather the source of matter, rather than matter itself, as we shall see a little later on. 2. The second conception of the nature of Purusha and Prakriti is in the nature of a half-truth which is also a half-error. It holds that Purusha and Prakriti must be regarded as aspects of that or Brahman, and which aspects are eternal and constant, and which cannot be withdrawn into that or Brahman as emanations may be, but which are fixed aspects or natures of that, which always have been, and always will be, in periods of activity and periods of non-activity between the cycles of activity. The error of this conception consists in ascribing eternal and real existence to these two principles, thus ascribing a duality to that instead of a oneness. This conception, while much nearer the truth than the first mentioned, still contains the fatal error just noted, which condemns it in the minds of the most logical of the Hindu thinkers, who see the truth of Kapala's idea in the third conception, which we shall now consider. 3. The third conception of the nature of Purusha and Prakriti, and which the best thinkers accept as correctly expressing Kapala's meaning, is that both Purusha and Prakriti are emanations from or appearances of that or Brahman, both having equal substance and degree of reality, but both being finite and being destined to pass away in time, that is, to be withdrawn into their common source that at the end of the great cyclic period of activity, when the great period of cosmic rest begins, which in turn is followed by a subsequent period of activity, and so on. In this conception, the fundamental principle of the Hindu philosophy, the existence of that as the only reality, is recognized as a necessary basis for the teaching, and as a necessary background for the doctrines concerning the phenomenal universe, and Purusha and Prakriti are seen to be but the primal forms of the two great principles of phenomenal activity, spirit and body, which are apparent in all phenomenal things, from Adam to man, and beyond man, and both of these principles are emanated from, or cast into apparent being by the or Brahman, in the process of world making. Instead of their being aspects of that, they are merely manifestations, appearances, or emanations, or even thought forms in the mind of the One, as we have described in our previous series of lessons. So you see that Kapala's teachings fit into the general framework of the great Hindu thought, instead of being an exception to, and in opposition to it. In this connection, we would call your attention to a frequent use of the word eternity in some of the Hindu writings. In many cases the term is used as in the Western sense, that is to say in the sense of duration without beginning or end, a condition of infinity and time, but inasmuch as the true Hindu philosopher ascribes and attributes this quality only to that, and denies it to all else, it may be seen that outside of that the word is meaningless to him, and cannot be employed. But, finding the need of the word in a secondary sense, he applies it to things having a continuous existence during the entire period of cosmic activity, which extends over great spaces of time, but which ceases to be when all is finally withdrawn into that, and the cycle of activity ceases and is succeeded by the cycle of non-activity when all manifestations, appearances, emanations and phenomena or ideas are withdrawn into that, which then dwells alone until another period of cosmic activity begins. As H.P. Blavatsky says in a footnote to her The Voice of the Silence, eternity with the Orientals has quite another signification than it has with us. It stands generally for the 100 years or age of Brahma, the duration of a Mahakalpa, or a period of 311040000000000 years. So you see that the reference to Purusha and Prakriti as eternal does not conflict with this conception of their nature, and their impermanence as compared with that. And this third conception of the inner teachings of the Sankhya system agrees with our understanding of them, and we can see no reason for withholding our approval of the schools of the Sankhya thought which so holds. Any other conception would be in direct opposition to the general trend of the Hindu thought, and contrary to reasonable belief on the part of those who are familiar with the thought of Kapala's time, and the methods of Hindu philosophy in general. Let us consider the details of the teaching concerning Purusha and Prakriti in view of this conception. Purusha, according to Kapala, is to be thought of not as one great world spirit, or world principle of spirit, in the sense of an undivided unity, but rather in the sense of a countless number of individual spirits, or spirit atoms, bound together with filaments of attraction and harmony arising from their common nature, but nevertheless free, independent, and individual. Kapala pointed out that if Purusha were but one, separated into countless tiny parts, they would be alike in nature, equal in every respect, and manifesting no variety, whereas all nature shows a constant and infinite variety. There is no universal Purusha, no Ishwar, no personal God in Kapala's philosophy. As one writer says, he found no need for one. His conception of Purushas was deemed sufficient to explain the ensouling of matter, under natural law. Kapila holds that Purusha is pure spirit, or substantial transcendental intelligence, independent of manas, or mind stuff, but that it is above attributes, or qualities, possessing neither, and in its natural condition is unaffected by joy, pain, or other emotions or sensations, which the soul experiences by reason of its embodiment in Prakriti, which has evolved mind, sense organs, etc., and is in nature and pure condition, until, entangled in Prakriti, it dwells in a state of pure bliss, peace, and rest, engaged in absolute meditation, which is the knowing of nothing. When the soul becomes involved in material existence, through its connection with Prakriti, it illuminates the mental and physical organism and faculties with its spiritual light, and the soul is enabled to enter into its existence of experience, or personal life, in the physical world. It acts upon the Prakriti as a magnet upon bits of steel, magnetizing them and giving to them power which they did not before possess, and which they could not possess without being in its field of influence or induction. But it is held to possess no actual volition of its own, and is therefore unable to express itself except through, and by means of, the various forms and phases of Prakriti. The involvement of the Purusha in the body of the Prakriti produces what is called a soul, that is a Purusha surrounded with its mental environment and instruments and organization. And the soul becomes subject to the laws of samsara, which is the Sanskrit term implying the cycle of existence, with its chain of cause and effect karmic results, and rebirths. And samsara brings pain to the soul, and the effort of the imprisoned Purusha is to free itself and return once more to its state of bliss. And, therefore, the effort of the teaching is to bring to the imprisoned and suffering Purusha the means of liberation, so that it may pass beyond samsara, rebirth, karma, and experience, and regain its normal and natural state of unconscious freedom and bliss, beyond change and pain, of which dreamless sleep is the physical symbol. The Sankhya system holds that the Purushas were originally in a state of pure spiritual existence, freed from the attraction of Prakriti, and from the desires of material life. But that being attracted and seduced by the glamour of Prakriti, they plunged into the latter, and once there became entangled in the manifold webs of material life. Bewildered by their strange surroundings, the Purushas lose their original state of freedom and clearness of perception, and become deluded by the maya or illusion of matter, and are led a merry dance in working their way out of the material plane in which they have become immersed. Like a fly that has taken a dip into the honey pot filled with poppy-made honey, the Purushas flounder around and are unable to use their legs and wings, and the more they struggle the worse is their condition, the more the narcotic of the poppy honey intoxicates them. Finally awakening to a realization of their former state of existence, and the real situation, the Purushas begin a process of extrication, and through long series of reincarnations work themselves from lower to higher states, slowly but surely, toward their former condition of bliss. This idea has been expressed by an English poet, Edward Carpenter, who says, "Slowly and resolutely as a fly cleans its legs of the honey in which it has been caught, so remove thou, if it only be for a time, every particle which sullies the brightness of the eye mind." The Sankhyas hold that from the combined action and reaction of the Purushas in Prakriti, all forms and varieties of life are created, and all varieties of matter are produced, it being held that every atom of matter is Prakriti instilled by an individual Purusha, manifesting activity and life. In this way the entire phenomena of the universe is accounted for, from the movement and activities of atoms, to the revolution of suns, and the manifestation of life, vegetable, animal, human, and superhuman. The Purushas combine in activities, forming all sorts of varieties of combinations, in the wrappings of bodies of Prakriti, of course, which account for the variety of material elements, and life. The entire phenomena of the material world, including matter and energy, as known to modern Western science, fits into the Sankhya idea, as the corpuscles of which matter is now known to be composed, as well as the aggregations of atoms, molecules, etc., and the various forms of force, may be considered as occasioned by the imprisoned Purushas, in their bodies of Prakriti, ever changing and moving, and evolving provided the fundamental theories of the Sankhyas be accepted. Kapila taught inorganic and organic evolution over 2,500 years before the days of Darwin and Herbert Spencer, and several centuries before Heraclitus, the great Grecian evolutionist. Kapila's conception of Prakriti was not that of gross matter, as so many of the Western writers on the subject are wont to assume. Instead, his conception may be expressed by the word nature, as used by Bruno and other thinkers, that is, as a subtle, ethereal substance, partaking rather of the nature of an energy, rather than of matter, a substance far more subtle and ethereal than the universal ether of modern Western science. Prakriti is the cosmic primordial energy, or substance from which the universe is evolved, and into which it again resolves itself, in endless cycles of change. Prakriti, he held, was not composed of ultimate atoms, as some other Hindu philosophers had claimed, but was atomless and continuous, the atoms being but centers of influence and activity caused by the embodiment of the Purushas, which gave activity to them, and which afterward formed the atoms into combinations. Mind was composed of chitta, or mind stuff, which arose from the action of Purusha upon Prakriti. Prakriti is described as active, according to energies of its own, along almost automatic lines, but it is insentient and mindless in itself, the sentient qualities being possible only when instigated and inspired by the Purushas. Some of the illustrations used bring out the above-mentioned point clearly, as for instance the ancient one in which Purusha is pictured as a lame man possessed of eyesight and the other senses, and Prakriti as a man in whom the senses of seeing and hearing, etc., had been omitted, but who possessed a good pair of legs. According to the fable, a combination is made and the lame man, Purusha, mounts up on the shoulders of the blind man, Prakriti, and together they move along briskly and intelligently, whereas separately they could make no progress. In the Sankhya conception of manas or mind as being of a semi-material nature, the conceptions of modern science of the materialistic school are approached. But still, the Sankhyas are far from being materialists, for they positively deny to Prakriti, the essence matter, any intelligence, mind, or sentiency, ascribing the latter to the action of Purusha, or spirit, which is above mind just as Prakriti is below it. One may read Ernst Haeckel, the German scientist, with new understanding, if he will interpret it by the light of the Sankhya teaching, Haeckel's soul of the atom being understandable in the light of Kapila's theory, as in no other way. Kapila undoubtedly inspired the German philosopher, Schopenhauer, and his successors, who took from the Hindu philosopher at least a portion of his fundamental conception. Kapila's thought renders materialism thinkable, as it adds a new element which explains the activities and evidences of sentiency in low material forms, and the evolution therefrom, whereas the gross materialism of the last century is unthinkable in its denial of mind, or soul qualities. And to think that all this was thought out by Kapila some 2,500 years ago, and that his teaching was based on still older teaching. And yet, the West speaks of the poor, ignorant, heathen Hindu, crying for the knowledge of the West. And not only this philosophy, but many others of India, anticipated by over 2,000 years many of the latest conceptions of modern Western science and philosophy. Verily, history repeats itself. Kapila teaches that the Prakriti, since its junction with, or impregnation by, Purusha, has been in a state of constant change and evolution, from succeeding form, and combination, the original condition of Prakriti having been altered so that it is difficult for the mind to conceive of its original and primitive or virgin condition. From a state far more ethereal than any form of ether known to science, it has assumed atomic combinations, and molecular arrangements, until in response to the never-ceasing demands of the Purushas to manifest in action and life, the Prakriti has been compelled to assume many gross and unethereal forms. In response to the developing senses of the mind occasioned by the evolving manifestations of the embodied Purushas, Prakriti has assumed forms and appearances recognizable by the senses of sight, hearing, smell, taste, etc., so as to be sensed by the sense organs. And the Purushas lost their original and primitive state of pure being, losing their original freedom as they became enmeshed in the web of Prakriti, becoming slaves to the senses, as they yielded to the caressing seduction of material manifestation. Prakriti in its original state was subtle, ethereal, diffused, tenuous, and without the qualities that are registered by sense. It could not respond to sense, nor could it arouse sense. Purusha in its original state was free from desire or attachment, and devoid of qualities, attributes, action, or attachment, as we understand these words in their material sense. The Sankhya's hold that because of these changes it is almost impossible for the individual mind to now grasp the nature of the original Prakriti, or to even imagine the state of excellence of Purusha before it yielded to the seduction of material existence. But they hold, by means of true knowledge and scientific reasoning, in addition to right living and detachment from passion, the mind can be brought to a state of understanding whereby it may grasp the nature of the Purusha original state, and the true nature of Prakriti. And this knowledge is one of the ways of liberation and freedom sought by the Sankhya, the road whereby the shortcut may be taken to freedom, instead of the road of repeated rebirth in material life. In all of the Hindu philosophies, it will be noticed, there is this constant repetition of the fact that material life is but an illusion and a snare, the result of ignorance and mistaken desire, and that the part of true wisdom is to escape from it as soon as possible. Death does not release the soul from material embodiment, for rebirth is always there to claim it. As the Sankhya say, the Purusha never escapes the embrace of Prakriti by the road of death, for death only weaves a more subtle covering for it, in which it dwells until rebirth draws it once more into the vortex. There is no escape by the road of death. The road of life is the only possible avenue of escape. The method of escape is by right living in combination with the development of wisdom, whereby the spirit is enabled to perceive its true nature and original conditions, and also the true nature and meaning of the unfolding Prakriti. A key to the teachings of the Buddhists is that of the Sankhyas. Both hold that material existence is foreign to the spirit, and consequently the latter is never permanently satisfied or happy in material life, but, instead, is always wanting something other than that which it possesses, and is always seeking to be at some other place than its place of abode at that moment. It is always crying more change, something else, somewhere else, someone else, and the more it gains, the more it wants. Possession destroys the desire, and gives birth to desire for other things. He who seeks happiness in material things pursues the will-o'-the-wisp, which he never overtakes. The only true happiness comes from renunciation of material things, and the resolute setting of the face toward the far-off land of the soul's desire, the land of the lost home of the spirit. Such is the teaching of Kapila, the great Sankhya. The fly is told to disentangle itself from the honey which entangles its feet and holds it a prisoner, the poppy honey which seems sweet, but yet which holds the tang of bitterness and intoxication. The Sankhya system is far more of the nature of a scientific philosophy, however, rather a religious philosophy. It concerns itself principally with an analysis and explanation of the process whereby Prakriti, played upon by Purusha, evolves itself into the phenomenal or material universe, including the manifestation of life. Kapila recognized the existence of material atoms as postulated by Canada in his Vaishika system, see subsequent lesson, but he opposed the latter's theory that these material atoms are things in themselves, are eternal, indivisible, and indestructible, and he taught, instead, that the atoms are simply centers of force in the great principle of Prakriti, the centers being established by the presence of the Purushas. Kapila's teaching regarding the combinations of the atom closely resembled the teachings of modern Western science, with its theories of ions, corpuscles, or electrons, which combining into atoms form certain material elements, which in turn combining into molecules form other grades and styles of matter. Kapila also taught another doctrine which is now favored by the modern science of the West, that doctrine of the love and hate of atoms, which explain the mutual attraction and repulsion of the particles which are evident through the physical universe, and which action and reaction account for the greater part of the physical phenomena. Kapila taught the doctrine of evolution, beginning with the atoms or ultimate insult particles, which, combining by reason of love or hate, formed more complex forms, from which in turn evolved more complex combinations, and so on, until at last organic matter was produced, and then the life forms began to appear, rising higher and higher in the scale until man, and Superman is reached, and still the urge of evolution continues on toward higher and still higher forms. But Kapila rejected any idea of purely material evolution. He held that unless the Purushas were instilled in the Prakriti and thus gave to it intelligent activity, there would be no material evolution. He made this distinction because of the spirit being the active cause of evolution, rather than because of any inherent quality in Prakriti itself. Kapila's philosophy exerted a marked effect upon the thought of the Grecian philosophers, and the doctrine may be traced directly back to the Sankhya teachings. In turn, the Greek philosophers have largely influenced the modern scientific thought, as may be seen by referring to any recent work on physical science, in which credit is freely given to the Greeks. The idea of evolution, material and spiritual, which shows throughout the Greek and Neoplatonic philosophies, and which is incorporated in all of the occult teachings, was arranged into a systematic form by Kapila, even though he obtained its germ ideas from his Hindu predecessors. As Professor Hopkins has said, Plato is full of Sankhya thought, worked out by him, but taken from Pythagoras. Before the 6th century BC, all the religious philosophical ideas of Pythagoras were current in India. If there were but one or two of these cases, it might be set aside as accidental coincidences, but such coincidences are too numerous to be the result of chance. A broken bar Neoplatonism and Christian Gnosticism owe much to India. A broken bar soul and light are one in the Sankhya system before they become so in Greece, and when they appear united in Greece it is by means of the thought which it borrowed from India. The famous three qualities, gunas, of the Sankhya reappear as the Gnostic three classes. John Davis, in his well-known work Hindu Philosophy, speaks of Kapila's Sankhya system as the first recorded system of philosophy in the world, the earliest attempt on record to give an answer, from reason, alone, to the mysterious questions which arise in every thoughtful mind about the origin of the world, the nature and relations of man, and his future destiny. The same writer gives to Kapila the credit for having influenced the German thought as expressed by Schopenhauer and Hartmann, their work being spoken of as a reproduction of the philosophic system of Kapila in its materialistic part, presented in a more elaborate form, but on the same fundamental lines. In this respect, the human intellect has gone over the same ground that it occupied more than 2,000 years ago, but on a more important question it has taken a step in retreat. Kapila recognized fully the existence of a soul in man, forming indeed his proper nature, the absolute of fict distinct from matter and immortal. But our latest philosophy, both here and in Germany, can see in man only a highly developed organization. In India, likewise, the influence of Kapila and the Sankhya has been great. Not only has it tinctured the other philosophies, and made for itself a place in the metaphysical thought of the majority of the Hindu religious systems, but it undoubtedly was the basis of much of the early Buddhistic thought, the Buddhists adopting without change a considerable portion of Kapila's doctrine, and allowing his influence to be manifested in a changed form in other points of their doctrine. In our consideration of the other forms of the Hindu philosophies, we shall see many instances of the influence of the thought of Kapila. One of the secondary, but important, theories advanced by Kapila, and which has been adopted by the majority of the other schools, and the religious sects of India, is that of the three gunas, or qualities inherent in Prakriti. These three gunas or qualities are held to be inherent in Prakriti, or nature, and consequently manifest in everything arising from nature's processes, or manifestations of Prakriti. They are believed to be present in equal proportions in Prakriti, that is, that they are equally balanced in nature. But in nature's manifestations, or forms of Prakriti, some one of the gunas may predominate in influence, or some two may overpower the third, and so on. To the relative predominance of one or two of the gunas, and the resulting conflict among the three, the variety of manifestation, as well as the constant change in nature, is largely due. In other words, the Purusha and the Prakriti, acted upon by the three gunas, the three often being spoken of as the five great elements, are the basis and cause of the phenomenal universe in all of its many and constantly changing forms and appearances. The three gunas are known, respectively, as Sattvas guna, also known as truth or harmony; Rajas guna, also known as passion or activity; and Tamas guna, also known as indifference or inertia. The definitions stated representing the several gunas in both their mental and material aspects, as we have said, from the action and reaction, combinations and oppositions. Of the three gunas, the physical and mental phenomena of the universe are produced. Sattva's guna is considered as imponderable, luminous and agreeable. Rajas guna as intermediate between ponderability and its opposite, and as both pleasant and unpleasant, or either as a quality of equilibrium, influencing and being influenced by both the other gunas. Tamas guna as ponderous, dark, and disagreeable. Sattva's guna and tamas guna are passive, in a sense, that is, in the lack of activity, motion or velocity. The intermediate active quality Rajas guna is the active, moving, exciting guna, which in turn is balanced by the harmonizing influence of Sattva's guna and the dead weight and inertia of Tamas guna. Tamas guna always obstructs, retards, hinders and holds back, or endeavors to do so in its mental aspect. It manifests ignorance, superstition, sloth, etc. Rajas guna is the source of physical and mental activity. It sets the mind, the air, the elements, and the forces of nature into action. Sattva's guna establishes harmony, wisdom, truth, right action, balanced thought, and destroys inertia and ignorance, and in every respect is the very opposite of tamas guna. Sattva's guna is predominant in the higher spiritual aspects of mind, while Rajas guna is predominant in the desire mind and tamas guna in the bodily mental processes. As the Bhagavad Gita says, the fruit of Sattvas is called good, the fruit of Rajas is called pain and dissatisfaction, and unrest. The fruit of tamas is called ignorance, and stupidity, and inertia. From Sattvas is produced wisdom, from Rajas, unrest and covetousness, from tamas, ignorance, delusion, and foolishness, together with sloth. The Sankhya teachings show that the gunas are manifest on every plane, and in every instance, not only in the material, but in the mental as well, having their manifestations in every form of phenomena. The likes and dislikes of the atoms, the pain and pleasure of matter, the bliss and misery of human life are all seen as manifestations of the gunas. The Sankhya teaches that there are 24 principles, or tattvas, proceeding from Prakriti under its energizing by the Purusha, and in accordance with the operations of the three gunas, just described. These tattvas, or principles, are as follows: the Buddhatattva, or principle of determinative consciousness, which proceeds from the undifferentiated Prakriti and from which principle in turn proceeds, the principle of Ahamkara, or self-consciousness, which involves the discrimination between I and not I, and from this principle in turn proceeds the following three classes of tattvas, viz., I. The 5 Tanamatras, or subtle elements of nature, namely, the ethereal, the aerial, the igneous, the aqueous, the terrene, and from which subtle elements proceed the 5 gross elements of nature, namely, Akasha, or the ether, air, fire, water, earth. 2. The psychic organism manifesting in the 5 senses, respectively, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, feeling. Also the psychic organs controlling the 5 instruments of action, which are named as the speech organs, the hands, the feet, the excretory organs, the genitals, respectively. 3. The manas, or mental substance or energy manifesting as the deliberative function of the mind, and including imagination. The above classification of the physical, physiological, and psychological principles, is regarded by modern philosophers, scientists, and occultists as rather too arbitrary for general acceptance, and the leading Sankhya scholars admit that it was not original with Kapila, nor vital or necessary to his general system, but was the classification in general vogue in his time, and for centuries before, and was naturally adopted by him to fill in the details of his general philosophical conception of Purusha and Prakriti, upon which dual conception his system is based. It is to be noticed in the Sankhya conception of creation, that matter, both subtle elements and gross elements, is evolved from the Prakriti after the development of determinative consciousness, and even the self-conscious principle, so that matter, in the strict sense of the term, is held to be preceded by consciousness in the Prakriti, and to be produced by consciousness or intelligence, in a sense. But this consciousness is a very different thing from the manas or mind of the individual, which he uses in his deliberative processes, imagination, etc., and which is but a thinking machine evolved by the consciousness in order to express material life and activities, just as were the organs of action, and the organs of the senses evolved. See above classification. To Kapila, manas or mind principle was an insentient, automatic energy, semi-material, and operative only by reason of the activity of the consciousness, which in turn is illuminated by the Purusha. The Sankhya conception of manas, or mind, is very nearly akin to the Western conception of brain, in the phases of its functioning processes. The Sankhyas teach that the soul is the Purusha, invested with its higher principles or tattvas, and must not be confounded with the Purusha which is spirit. The soul is given a covering of a subtle body, or linga sharira, which encloses the buddhi almanka or the 5 tanamatras and the 10 psychic instruments of sensation and action, and also manas the Purusha, of course, being at the center of the soul, as spirit or Atman. This subtle body, linga sharira, is invested with a grosser body, composed of the 5 gross elements, and which gross body perishes at death, while its subtle counterpart survives in samsara, going through incarnations and changes of physical bodies, etc. The action of Prakriti is twofold. First, it has its own action inspired by the laws of its own nature, which act in a more or less automatic and unconscious fashion, according to an orderly trend resembling instinctive action. But intelligence and consciousness it has not, nor can it have until it is illuminated by the involved Purushas. The Sankhya's hold that the process of the creation of the material universe, with its forms of life, and energy, is occasioned by the beginning of each period of creative activity, or day of Brahm, by a subtle stirring in the bosom of Prakriti owing to some law of its nature and influenced by the accumulated karma of past creations, and whereby the Purushas are attracted even as the bees and flies are attracted by sugar water, or syrup. Flowing into the fluidic undifferentiated Prakriti, enticed by the subtle attraction of her illusory charms, the Purushas come and once entrap the results of the combination ensue. First there appears in the substance of Prakriti an awareness or state of universal consciousness, which is called Mahat, or the Great, which gradually shades into a cosmic determinative consciousness on the part of the whole principle of the Prakriti. This is followed by the development of the consciousness of separateness, or self-consciousness, or egoism, called by the Hindus, Hamkara, and which is not, as some have supposed, a conscious realization of each Purusha of its own real nature and individuality, but rather a false consciousness of itself as a personality, distinct from all else, and partaking of avidya, or ignorance concerning its own true nature as pure spirit, or Purusha. From thence on there is an involution of enfolding into Prakriti of the Purushas, sinking deeper and deeper into the illusory existence, and even causing the Prakriti to take on subtle and then gross forms, of matter in order to satisfy the desires of the deluded Purushas for material activity and life. When the involution has reached its limit, there then sets in the stage of evolution, as we have stated, in which the Prakriti is urged into higher and higher forms, as the ascending Purushas rise in the scale in their upward journey toward the blissful state. The influence or action of the Purushas causes an action on the part of the Prakriti, and which the Sankhyas describe as akin to the action of particles of steel when brought into close juxtaposition with a magnet, whereupon they manifest a new action and arrangement foreign to their original custom. And so Purusha is the magnet which affects the Prakriti into which it has been attracted. For remember, that not only does the magnet attract the bits of steel, but the latter likewise attracts the magnet itself, and changes are produced upon both. From the close contiguity of the Purushas, the Prakriti is given new activities, and changes are set into operation, whereby the creative process results. In this description we have ignored the numerous technicalities and terms in which the Sankhya teachings abound, the strange Sanskrit terms, and the unfamiliar conceptions of the detail of the universal involutionary and evolutionary processes tending to confuse the Western mind and to divert the attention from the fundamental ideas. And, now, this is the Sankhya system of Kapila stated briefly and as simply as possible. The student of the yogi philosophy as set forth in our previous series of lessons, and in which we have given the inner teachings of the eclectic school of the Hindu thought, may see how the conceptions of Kapila fit into our own teachings, and yet how they differ. Kapila directs the attention of the student to the nature of the soul's immersion and entanglement in the principle of matter in a most vivid manner, and accompanied with a degree of poetic symbology that enables the mind to take hold of the idea readily. And read in the light of the inner teachings, The teachings of Kabbalah are of great interest and advantage to the student in his work of assimilating the truths of the Hindu philosophy and outside of their undoubted historical and philosophical interest. But the student will also see wherein the Sankhya system fails to express the highest conceptions, and wherein it leads one on a false bypath. Kabbalah ignores, although he does not deny, the existence of the absolute Brahman and Parabrahm, and devotes his attention to an examination of the how of creative activity and phenomenal life and being, a most important work, surely, and yet not the most important. Moreover, he teaches that the individual Purushas existed before the creation of the universe, and before they became immersed in Prakriti, that is, existed in separate existence. Whereas our teachings are that when the great outpouring took place, the Absolute projected its spirit into the manifestation called matter, and when the evolutionary wave began, the tendency toward individual expression brought about the origin of the individual souls, which before that time had their existence only in a state of oneness. And yet Kabbalah has given us a wonderfully clear idea of the development of the personal consciousness or sense of egoism, or ahamkara, from the universal life consciousness or cosmic buddhi, which in turn evolved from the cosmic spirit awareness, or universal spiritual consciousness, or Mahat, in which the Purushas became aware of themselves in a state of unity, or oneness of the many, which was their first step after they had entered into Prakriti, and left the state of pure spirit or virgin Purusha. A comparison between the two teachings will show the resemblance, and the relation they bear to each other. In our own teachings we have had little or nothing to say regarding the three gunas which we have described in explaining the Sankhya system, but we have said that the conception was familiar to all Hindu thought, and we have treated of them in a general way as forming a part of the laws of nature. In fact, the inner teachings hold that the three gunas are in the nature of a poetical conception of, or an idealization of, the natural forces, instead of being distinct principles in themselves as Kabbalah and others have taught. Strictly speaking, even Kabbalah admits that the gunas are merely qualities or forces in nature, or Prakriti, and are not things in themselves, as so many of the Sankhyas hold them to be. Special Message 3. In our message of last month, we spoke to you of truth. We now invite you to a consideration of the symbols whereby we seek to enter into an understanding of the nature of truth. We may consider truth by the symbol of substance. Substance, as you know, is the underlying or standing under reality behind the phenomenal and relative appearances, shapes, forms and names of the physical universe. Metaphysically, the term is used to express the idea of the real thing in itself, which serves as the real foundation, basis and essence of the universe apparent to our senses and perceptions. Truth is the universal substance which supports the universe, and upon which all else depends. And all that is apparent to our sense perception must needs be manifestations, expressions or emanations of and from the universal substance, or else untruth. There is nothing else for it to be. There is no other substance to support anything, or from which anything could have emanated. All else is untruth. 2. We may consider truth by means of the symbol of power. And, mark you this, not only does truth manifest power, but it is the essence of power itself. Metaphysically, viewing truth from this aspect, it may be asserted that truth is power, and that, other than truth, there is no power, and can be no power. Truth is omnipotence or all power, containing within itself all the power there is, ever has been, or ever can be. Not only is it omnipotent, or possessing all power, but it is omnipotence or all power itself. There is no other source of power than truth, and all manifestations or expressions of power must be attributed, directly or indirectly, to truth, for there is nowhere else whence it could have come. All else is untruth. 3. We may consider truth by means of the symbol of being. Being is the term used for expressing the idea of real existence, and truth is not only really existent, but is real existence itself. There can be no being or existence outside or apart from, or other than, truth, for there is nothing else to be or exist, and all being or existence must proceed from truth, that is, must be manifested, expressed or emanated from it. Truth is existent, or in being, everywhere. It is not only omnipresent, or present everywhere, but is also omnipresence, or all presence itself. Presence, being and existence belong to truth, and are merely symbols of identity with aspects of truth. Outside of, and apart from truth, the terms are meaningless untruth. In next month's message, we shall continue this consideration of the symbols whereby we seek to enter into an understanding of the nature of truth. Our meditation for the coming month is, truth is all substance, all power, all being, and outside of truth there can be and is no substance, no power, no being.